there is a possibility that I will extend the date. And if I do that, if I see that we're close to a deal or the deal is going in the right direction, I would do that at the same tariffs that we're charging now. I would not increase the tariffs.
U.S. officials said they had made progress in their trade talks with China on Friday. The two sides plan to continue talks in Washington this week to try to work on major sticking points. The United States and China are trying to reach a deal before President Trump's March 1st deadline, when he has threatened to raise tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods from 10% to 25%. Joining us now is author Parag Khanna. He's out with the new book entitled The Future is Asian: Commerce, Conflict, and Culture in the 21st Century. Good to have you on.
And Richard Haas, why don't you start the questions?
Sure. When you say, Parag, the future is Asian, what are you saying? Is this about China? Is this about Asia more broadly? And is this implicitly you're saying things are going their way?
There are a lot of things going their way, and let's bear in mind that it predates the Trump administration. We're talking about global structural change that began the day the Soviet Union collapsed almost 30 years ago. That's the point in time at which Asian economies began to get more integrated with each other. By the time of the financial crisis 10 years ago, Asians were already trading more with each other than with the rest of the world, and that helped cushion them. And that's before they started all of these major trade liberalization agreements, like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership that's supposed to kick in this year, before the Belt and Road Initiative that's creating more infrastructure to trade with each other. So there is a major Asian story that we often miss, and China's a big part of it. I would say it's like 40 to 50% of the Asian story. We often focus just too much on China alone.
Let me push back then, because there's optimism in your book, and this is almost the consensus. What could go wrong? What about North Korea doesn't denuclearize? There's a war over Taiwan. China has internal instability. Japan says it needs nuclear weapons. India and Pakistan go at it like they may. How confident are you that the future really is Asian?
So there's two answers to that. The first is that those tensions are already priced into the system. Asians have gotten this far over the last 30 years with all of those tensions bedeviling them, right? You had a major border standoff 2 years ago between India and China. Their trade volumes continue to go up. You had Chinese protesters trashing Toyota cars in the streets of Beijing. They've just decided to further liberalize trade in order to help offset the losses and the difficulties of importing certain goods from the United States with the trade war. North Korea has been a persistent lurking danger. You know, part of the nature of a system is that these tensions and frictions do arise and even get worse, and there may even be war. It doesn't invalidate the notion, right, that they are, you can have a violent resolution to a conflict. There is still a resolution to it, and we're going to get there one way or the other with North Korea, right? And we can hope that it's the peaceful way. But does that derail what I'm talking about? I'm talking about 40% of global GDP. I'm talking about 50 countries. I'm talking about 5 billion people. What's happening in North Korea is probably more on our radar every single day than it is on Asians, because they're busy building this Asian story.
So just following up, Parag, on Richard's question, you're optimistic, and certainly I think most analysts would agree with you, but others might say, well, I read this book before in 1989 called The Japan That Can Say No, that the Japanese were going to lap us economically and turn us in 30 years into nothing but Japan's granary. And then, of course, they went through about, the lost decade or 2 lost decades. Why won't that happen this time?
Well, the fact that we were wrong then doesn't mean that we would be wrong again today to be talking about what is right about Asia, right? We were isolating one particular country, Japan, which is not the strongest power in Asia, which is an insular island nation, which doesn't exert geopolitical influence the way China does. And we would be missing, again, the bigger picture. What I'm talking about is how Japan and South Korea and the tiger economies helped to make China what it is today. And today, Japan, South Korea, and China are the leading investors in the next wave of Asian growth economies, which is Pakistan through India through ASEAN. That is 2.5 billion people with younger populations, in some cases higher growth rates than China itself. So it's not about whether we were right or wrong about Japan then, or whether we're right or wrong about China today. Again, every country has its stresses, but they operate in a way in which they're mutually reinforcing waves of collective growth right now, despite their geopolitical tensions. So when you're talking about us being wrong about the geopolitical potential in the 80s of a country of 100 million people, right now I'm talking about a system of, again, 5 billion people in about 40-something countries. So it's a very different situation we're in right now. Again, they trade more, they invest more with each other. They're coordinating everything from infrastructure to also transfers of people in terms of their liberal immigration policy. So I'm an accidental optimist here. It's not really about whether I have some kind of overly sunny outlook. I'm calling it like I see it over there.
Parag, I want to talk about moral values, because a lot of people are saying, as weird as we are about all the dispute that's happening in America, that we should be dreading the fact that Asia rise into a superpower, particularly China, because the values they have of democracy and human rights are actually very scary. What are your views on that, and what did you find out?
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because again, it brings up this difference between China and Asia. You know, a lot of books about Asia in the last 20 years have really been about China, with a page or two devoted to everyone else. So let me be very clear. There are more people living in democracies in Asia, right? Whether it's those that benefited from American post-war occupation and tutelage like Japan, or whether it's former British colonies like Australia and New Zealand. But now I'm also talking about India, Indonesia, the Philippines, right? There's about 2 billion people living in democracies in Asia. That's more than the population of China. So when we say we worry about democracy and human rights, authoritarianism, surveillance state, social credit system, all of those things, let's be clear that many billions of people in Asia worry about those things in the same way that we do, right? And they don't look at China and say, I want to be like China. They may say we want a really good industrial policy. It would be nice to have nice infrastructure, but we are not going to become police states. Let's be absolutely clear. As someone who was born in India, as someone who travels in Indonesia and the Philippines all the time, it's a great disservice to these rich cultures. You know, they're not necessarily totally liberal, right? And they certainly have some illiberal leaders right now, but these are democracies. So let's start to appreciate them for what they are and the evolutions that they're making, and not pretend that they're all going to become like China. They're not. They're actually going in the opposite direction. And what I look at in the book is what I call capacity, state capacity, the capacity of a government to do things for its people, to deliver the basic job creation, social spending, healthcare. And what you're seeing, again, in the democracies, 2 billion people in their governments, you're seeing this clear push to do more, to deliver for the people in a democratic fashion. We should support that.
The book is The Future is Asian: Commerce, Conflict, and Culture in the 21st Century. Parag, Khanna, thank you very much for coming on the show this morning. And ZAINAB, SALBI, thank you as well. Great to see you.